The morning sun cast long shadows across the Germanic forest as Marcus Aurelius Brutus gripped his gladius with white knuckles. The cold steel felt like an extension of his very soul, a weapon that had tasted blood in 17 different campaigns across the empire. Today would be different. Today, he would face the most savage tribe the legions had ever encountered, and every weapon in Rome's arsenal would be put to the ultimate test. Marcus had joined the 10th Legion 5 years ago, a farm boy from the hills outside Rome who thought he understood what war meant. How wrong he had been. His first glimpse of true Roman brutality came during the siege of Masada, where he watched in horror as his centurion demonstrated the devastating power of the ballista. The massive siege engine hurled stones the size of wine barrels with such force that they didn't just kill enemy soldiers, they obliterated them completely, leaving nothing but red mist and scattered bone fragments across the fortress walls. "You see, boy," Centurion Gaius had growled, his scarred face twisted into a cruel smile. "Rome doesn't just defeat her enemies. We erase them from existence." The old soldier had been carrying a Pugio at his side, the triangular dagger that every legionnaire knew could puncture through chain mail like it was made of cloth. Marcus had watched Gaius demonstrate this very fact on a captured rebel, sliding the blade between ribs with surgical precision, the victim's eyes going wide with shock before the light faded forever. But it was the Scorpio that truly introduced Marcus to the savage efficiency of Roman engineering. These smaller siege weapons were like giant crossbows, capable of firing iron-tipped bolts with such velocity that they could pin a man to a tree from 300 paces away. During the campaign in Britannia, Marcus had seen an entire line of Celtic warriors skewered like meat on a spit, their screams echoing across the battlefield as they writhed helplessly, impaled but not yet dead. The scutum shield that Marcus carried wasn't just defensive equipment, it was a weapon in itself. Made from layers of wood and reinforced with iron, it weighed nearly 20 pounds and could crush a man's skull when wielded properly. During close combat, Roman soldiers were trained to use the shield's iron boss as a battering ram, smashing it into enemy faces with enough force to shatter teeth and break noses. Marcus remembered his first kill, using his scutum to knock a Gallic warrior to the ground before finishing him with his gladius. The satisfying crunch of bone against iron had haunted his dreams for weeks. The gladius itself was perhaps the most perfect killing instrument ever devised by human hands. Only 2 feet long, it was designed specifically for close-quarters combat where longer swords became cumbersome. The blade was leaf-shaped, wide at the base and tapering to a deadly point, perfect for both slashing and thrusting. Roman training emphasized the thrust over the slash, as a deep puncture wound was almost always fatal while a cut might allow an enemy to keep fighting. Marcus had perfected the technique of sliding his gladius between an opponent's ribs, angling upward to pierce the heart or downward to rupture internal organs. Today's battle would test every weapon and every skill the legions possessed. The Germanic tribe they faced was known as the Cimbri, and their reputation for savagery was legendary even among the battle-hardened Romans. These weren't civilized enemies who fought according to established rules of warfare, these were barbarians who took no prisoners and showed no mercy. As the Germanic war horns sounded in the distance, Marcus checked his equipment one final time. His pilum, the heavy javelin that every legionnaire carried, was perfectly balanced for throwing. The iron tip was designed with a cruel twist, it would bend upon impact, making it impossible for enemies to pull it out of their shields and throw it back. But the real purpose of the pilum wasn't just to kill, it was to render enemy shields useless, forcing barbarians to discard their primary defense and face Roman steel with nothing but courage and fury. The cavalry units were already in position, their long spears glinting in the morning light. These weren't the short weapons of the infantry, these were 12-foot lances designed to punch through armor and flesh with the combined force of horse and rider. Marcus had seen cavalry charges turn entire armies into broken, fleeing mobs within minutes. The psychological impact was almost as devastating as the physical destruction, horses thundering across the battlefield while their riders lowered their spears like the very spears of the gods themselves. But perhaps the most terrifying weapon in Rome's arsenal wasn't made of steel, or would it was the soldiers themselves. Years of brutal training had turned ordinary men into killing machines. They marched in perfect formation, their armor gleaming, their weapons razor-sharp, their discipline absolute. When Roman legions appeared on a battlefield, enemies often broke and ran before the first sword was drawn, knowing that facing Roman steel meant almost certain death. The Germanic warriors emerged from the forest like wild animals, their bodies painted with blue symbols, their hair wild and unkempt, their weapons crude but deadly. They outnumbered the Romans 3-1, but Marcus felt no fear. He had learned something during his years with the legion's numbers meant nothing when facing superior weapons and training. The order came down the line like thunder. Release! Hundreds of pila flew through the air in perfect unison. A steel rain that fell upon the charging barbarians with devastating effect. The heavy javelins punched through wooden shields, through leather armor, through flesh and bone. Men fell screaming, clutching at the iron points protruding from their chests. Others tried to pull the bent weapons from their shields, leaving themselves exposed to the second volley that followed immediately after. Those barbarians who survived the pilum assault crashed into the Roman shield wall like a wave breaking against rocks. This was where Roman training and weapons proved their worth. The legionnaires fought in perfect coordination, their shields locked together to form an impenetrable barrier, their gladii thrusting out like serpents' tongues to bite and kill. Marcus found himself face to face with a massive Germanic warrior, a man who stood nearly 7 feet tall and wielded a long sword with both hands. The barbarian's weapon had reach, but Marcus had training and superior equipment. He caught the descending blade on his scutum, feeling the impact rattle his teeth, then stepped forward and drove his gladius deep into the giant's belly. The Germanic warrior's eyes went wide with shock as Roman steel found his vitals. He tried to swing his sword again, but Marcus twisted the gladius savagely, opening the wound wider, watching as the light of life faded from his enemy's eyes. All around him, the sounds of battle raged. Steel rang against steel. Men screamed in pain and fury, and the ground grew slick with blood. The Romans held their formation despite the ferocious assault, their discipline and superior weapons giving them the advantage they needed. Every thrust of a gladius found its mark. Every strike of a scutum shattered bone. Every Roman soldier fought like a machine designed for one purpose only: killing. The Germanic chieftain himself appeared through the melee, a bear of a man with gold torques around his arms and a massive two-handed axe that could cleave a man in half. He charged directly at the Roman center, his weapon whirling in deadly arcs, cutting down 2 legionnaires before anyone could react. For a moment, it seemed like his berserker fury might break the Roman line. But Centurion Gaius was there, his long spada sword already in motion. The spada was longer than a gladius, designed specifically for mounted combat but equally deadly on foot when wielded by a master. Gaius parried the chieftain's axe with his blade, the impact sending sparks flying, then riposted with a thrust that opened the barbarian's throat. The Germanic leader fell to his knees, blood pouring from his neck, his axe falling from nerveless fingers. With their leader dead, the Germanic resistance began to crumble. This was when Roman cavalry struck, their long lances punching through the confused barbarians like they were made of paper. Horses trampled the wounded underfoot while their riders used their spears to kill anyone who tried to flee. It was slaughter pure and simple, the kind of overwhelming victory that built empires and terrified enemies for generations. But the battle was far from over. As the main Germanic force retreated, Roman engineers wheeled forward their most devastating weapons, the ballistae and catapults that had been assembled during the night. These siege engines weren't designed for attacking fortifications. They were loaded with hundreds of iron bolts and stone fragments, turning them into massive shotguns that could sweep enemy formations from the battlefield. The sound they made when fired was like the anger of the gods themselves, a deep thrumming that seemed to shake the very earth. The projectiles they launched created corridors of death through the fleeing barbarians, killing dozens with each shot. Men were torn apart by iron fragments, crushed by stones, or simply disappeared in clouds of red mist. Marcus watched this mechanical slaughter with a mixture of awe and horror. This was Roman warfare at its most brutal, a combination of superior technology, ruthless training, and absolute dedication to victory regardless of the cost. The Germanic warriors were brave, perhaps braver than the Romans, but bravery meant nothing when facing weapons that could kill from hundreds of yards away. As the day wore on, the battle turned into a pursuit. Roman cavalry hunted down fleeing barbarians with their long spears, running them down like wild animals. The infantry followed, their gladii finishing off the wounded with efficient precision. No prisoners were taken. No mercy was shown. This was total war, Roman style, where the only acceptable outcome was the complete destruction of the enemy. The aftermath was always the worst part for Marcus. Walking among the dead, he could see the devastating effectiveness of each Roman weapon. Bodies pierced by pila lay twisted in pools of blood. Men killed by gladius thrusts bore small, neat wounds that had nonetheless been fatal. Others had been crushed by scutum strikes or torn apart by siege engine projectiles. The ground was littered with broken weapons and shattered shields, testament to the superiority of Roman steel. But it was the psychological impact that truly demonstrated Rome's power. Word of this massacre would spread throughout Germania, carried by the few survivors who had managed to escape into the deep forest. Other tribes would hear how Roman weapons had turned their greatest warriors into corpses. Some would submit rather than face the same fate. Others would ally themselves with Rome, hoping to avoid destruction. That night, as the legions made camp and tended their wounded, Marcus sat by his fire and cleaned his gladius with methodical care. The blade had drunk deep today, and it deserved respect. Every Roman weapon was a work of art, crafted by master smiths who understood that their creations would determine the fate of the empire. From the smallest pugio to the largest ballista, each one was designed with a single purpose: to kill efficiently and without mercy. Centurion Gaius approached, his own weapons gleaming clean in the firelight. "You fought well today, Brutus," he said, settling down beside the fire. "But remember what you saw today. Remember how Roman steel cuts through barbarian flesh like a hot knife through butter. Remember how our formations held against overwhelming odds. Remember why Rome rules the world." Marcus nodded, understanding the lesson. It wasn't just about weapons, though Roman weapons were certainly superior to anything their enemies could field. It was about the complete system of warfare that Rome had perfected over centuries. Every piece of equipment, every tactical formation, every training exercise was designed to create the most effective killing force the world had ever seen. The pugio at his side had accounted for 3 kills today, its triangular blade punching through leather armor to find vital organs beneath. The weapon was small enough to be concealed, sharp enough to penetrate any defense, and perfectly balanced for throwing when necessary. During the height of battle, Marcus had seen a fellow legionnaire draw his pugio and throw it with deadly accuracy, the blade taking a charging barbarian in the throat at 15 paces. The sling units had also proven their worth, raining lead bullets down on enemy formations with devastating accuracy. These weren't mere stones picked up from the ground, these were carefully crafted projectiles, cast in lead to maximize their impact. A skilled slinger could put a bullet through a man's skull at 100 yards, and the Romans employed entire companies of these specialists. The psychological effect was almost as important as the physical damage. The whistle of incoming sling bullets caused even veteran warriors to flinch and break formation. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new enemies, and new opportunities to demonstrate Roman superiority. The Germanic tribes were only one threat among many. To the east lay Parthia, with its heavy cavalry and powerful composite bows. To the south were the kingdoms of Africa, with their war elephants and exotic weapons. To the north were the endless steppes, home to nomadic horsemen who struck like lightning and vanished like smoke. But Marcus felt no fear about these future conflicts. Roman weapons and Roman tactics had proven themselves against every type of enemy, in every kind of terrain, under every possible condition. The gladius could cut through any armor. The pilum could penetrate any shield. The ballista could breach any fortification. And the Roman soldier himself, trained from childhood in the arts of war, was the most dangerous weapon of all. As he lay down to sleep, Marcus could still hear the sounds of the day's battle echoing in his memory. The whistle of Pila flying through the air, the crash of scutum against shield, the wet sound of gladius finding flesh, the screams of the dying and the roars of the victorious. These were the sounds that followed Roman legions wherever they went, the soundtrack of empire being built one battle at a time. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Scouts reported a massive confederation of Germanic tribes gathering to the north, led by a chieftain named Arminius who had somehow united dozens of clans under a single banner. This wasn't just another raid or border skirmish, this was going to be the largest battle the region had ever seen, with the fate of Roman Germania hanging in the balance. The preparation began immediately. Every weapon was sharpened to a razor edge. Every piece of armor was polished until it gleamed. The siege engines were carefully maintained and loaded with their deadliest projectiles. Most importantly, the men themselves were prepared mentally for what was to come. Roman military discipline wasn't just about following orders, it was about maintaining composure in the face of overwhelming odds. Marcus found himself assigned to the front rank of the hastati, the youngest and most aggressive soldiers in the legion. This was both an honor and a death sentence. The front rank always took the heaviest casualties, but they also had the best chance to win glory and advancement. His gladius had been replaced with a newer model, its edge so sharp that it could cut through a silk scarf dropped onto the blade. The battle, when it came, was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. The Germanic Confederation had managed to field over 50,000 warriors, a sea of painted faces and crude weapons that stretched to the horizon. But Rome had brought its own reinforcements, 3 full legions, plus auxiliary troops, cavalry, and enough siege equipment to level a city. The initial exchange was devastating on both sides. Roman pila carved bloody channels through the Germanic ranks, but the barbarians kept coming, climbing over their own dead to reach Roman steel. When the lines finally met, the sound was like the end of the world. Steel rang against steel, wood splintered against iron, and men died by the hundreds. Marcus found himself fighting for his life against a succession of enemies, each one trying to claim the honor of killing a Roman legionnaire. His gladius moved in perfect arcs, trained muscle memory guiding every thrust and parry. The first barbarian fell with Roman steel in his heart. The second lost his arm to a perfectly timed cut. The third tried to grapple with Marcus directly, only to meet the iron boss of his scutum with bone-crushing force. But it was the Roman siege engines that turned the tide of battle. The ballistae had been repositioned during the night to create overlapping fields of fire, and when they opened up simultaneously, the effect was catastrophic. Entire sections of the Germanic line simply disappeared, replaced by clouds of blood and scattered body parts. The psychological impact was immediate. Thousands of barbarians broke and ran, unable to face weapons that killed from impossible distances. The cavalry charge that followed was the stuff of legend. Roman horsemen thundered across the battlefield with their long spears lowered, cutting through the confused barbarians like a scythe through wheat. Each lance accounted for multiple kills as the horses trampled everything in their path. Within minutes, organized Germanic resistance had collapsed completely. But Arminius himself was still alive, still fighting, still trying to rally his shattered forces. The Germanic chieftain was a giant among men, wielding a two-handed sword with devastating effect. He had already killed a dozen Roman soldiers and seemed to grow stronger with each victory. For a moment, it looked like he might single-handedly turn the tide of battle. That was when Marcus saw his chance for immortality. Ignoring the chaos around him, he worked his way through the melee toward the enemy leader. His gladius felt light in his hand, perfectly balanced for the task ahead. This was what he had trained for, what every Roman soldier dreamed of: the chance to face an enemy champion in single combat. The duel was brief but intense. Arminius had size and strength, but Marcus had superior weapons and training. The Germanic chieftain's long sword had reach, but it was clumsy in close quarters. Marcus used his scutum to close the distance, deflecting the barbarian's wild swings while looking for an opening. When it came, he struck without hesitation, driving his gladius deep into Arminius's side, angling upward to find the heart. The Germanic leader fell to his knees, disbelief written across his face. He had united a dozen tribes, fielded the largest army in Germanic history, and come within sight of driving Rome from his homeland forever. But in the end, Roman steel had found him just as it found all of Rome's enemies. His death broke the last Germanic resistance, and the battle became a rout. The slaughter that followed was methodical and complete. Roman weapons proved their worth once again as cavalry hunted down fleeing enemies and infantry finished off the wounded. The ballistae continued firing until their ammunition was exhausted, each shot claiming dozens of barbarian lives. By sunset, the Germanic Confederation had ceased to exist, wiped from the face of the earth by Roman military superiority. In the aftermath, as Marcus walked among the dead, he could see clearly why Rome ruled the world. It wasn't just courage or discipline, though the legions had both in abundance. It wasn't just superior numbers, because the Romans were often outnumbered. It was the weapons themselves, each one a masterpiece of military engineering designed for maximum killing efficiency. The gladius in his hand had probably killed more men than any other weapon in human history. Multiplied across thousands of legionnaires and hundreds of battles, it had carved out the greatest empire the world had ever known. The pilum had broken more shield walls than any other javelin. The ballista had breached more fortifications than any other siege engine. Each weapon was a work of lethal art, crafted by masters who understood that war was ultimately about killing the enemy more efficiently than they could kill you. As the years passed and Marcus rose through the ranks, he would see Roman weapons prove their worth in a dozen different campaigns. Against the Parthians in the east, where Roman archery equipment and siege engines proved superior to anything the enemy could field. Against the Egyptians in the south, where Roman steel cut through bronze weapons like they were made of wood. Against the barbarians of Britannia, where Roman discipline and superior arms conquered an entire island despite fierce resistance. Each campaign taught the same lesson. Rome's weapons weren't just tools of war, they were instruments of destiny. The empire existed because Roman smiths could craft better steel than anyone else. Legions conquered because Roman engineers could build better siege engines. Enemies submitted because they knew that facing Roman weapons meant almost certain death. The gladius that had started as a simple sword had become a symbol of Roman power. The pilum wasn't just a javelin, it was the spear point of civilization itself. The ballista wasn't merely a siege engine, it was the hammer with which Rome shaped the world. Every weapon in the Roman arsenal served a dual purpose: to kill enemies and to spread the message that resistance to Roman rule was futile. By the time Marcus reached the rank of centurion himself, he had personally witnessed the devastating effectiveness of every weapon in Rome's arsenal. He had seen sling bullets punch through enemy helmets. He had watched gladius blades slice through the finest armor. He had observed ballista bolts pin multiple enemies to trees. Each weapon was perfectly designed for its intended purpose, crafted with a level of skill and attention to detail that Rome's enemies simply couldn't match. The final lesson came during Marcus's last campaign, a punitive expedition against rebels in Gaul who thought they could challenge Roman authority. The battle was over almost before it began. Roman weapons had evolved even further during his years of service. New designs, better metallurgy, improved tactics, everything had been refined to create the most effective killing force in human history. As he stood on the battlefield afterward, surrounded by the bodies of enemies who had dared to challenge Rome, Marcus finally understood the true secret of the empire's success. It wasn't just about having better weapons, though Roman steel was certainly superior to anything their enemies could field. It was about the complete integration of weapons, training, tactics, and psychology into a single system designed for one purpose: victory at any cost. The gladius at his side had cut down countless enemies over the years. The scutum on his arm had crushed skulls and broken bones. The pilum in his other hand had punched through shields and armor. But the most deadly weapon of all was Marcus himself, a Roman soldier trained from birth to use these instruments of war with lethal precision. That was Rome's true advantage, not just better weapons, but better warriors to wield them. Standing there in the fading light of another Roman victory, surrounded by the tools of his trade, Marcus could see clearly why the empire would endure for centuries. As long as Roman smiths could forge steel, Roman engineers could build siege engines, and Roman soldiers could wield weapons with disciplined precision, no enemy on earth could stand against the legions. The weapons of Rome weren't just instruments of war, they were the very foundation upon which the greatest empire in human history was